And we're back. And so, Guido, I wanted to ask you, just before the break, is deflation primarily a political problem?
Yeah, it's a political and a sociological problem. Again, as we have said before, it doesn't matter ultimately for the economy whether you're operating at a higher or at a lower price level. So the distinct differences that come into play between inflation and deflation concern essentially the distribution of revenues. If you have a deflation, and a deflation hits a highly indebted economy such as ours in the present day, then it's likely to hit debtors, right? Because, as we have said before, their revenue will now diminish, but they still are in debt that they have contracted at a higher price level in the past. So they will not be able to pay back. So what happens in those cases very often is that the firms go bankrupt and households, families go bust as well, right? They can no longer pay back the loan the mortgage that they've taken out to pay for the home. So what happens then is that the deflation entails a redistribution of the assets that exist in the economy. Because it's not because some people go bust that the things that they have owned up to now no longer exist, that they just evaporate. The firms are still there. Right? The buildings are there, the raw materials, and the people who are working for them. The houses are owned by families still exist. Right? It's only that they don't own them anymore.
Right.
So what happens is that we get a huge redistribution of productive assets from one set of the citizens, the indebted ones, to the other ones who are less in debt or not in debt at all.
Now, you're characterizing this according to a very significant and rather sudden deflation.
Yes.
Yeah, and that same thing would happen in a hyperinflation as well.
Yes.
And so, but then
the winners and losers are different, right?
Right,
in
exactly.
Hyperinflation, it's the debtors who win constantly.
Right.
And so those who have the closest contacts to banks and to central banks in particular.
First use of money.
Yes, they take it out, and whereas in the case of a deflation, everybody who has been conservative in their, or halfway conservative in their finance is likely to be a winner.
So the reason this is such an important distinction is because most of the people that are listening to this particular broadcast do not have a central banker as their best friend.
It's very unusual.
And they are probably not the first user or even the second user of the money.
Yes.
And probably they're very much closer to Main Street than Wall Street.
Right.
And so for them, deflation is actually either small d in a more gradual sense or a big D even. Is the worst really more of a friend.
The worst that can happen to them, and actually this is likely to happen to many people, to many citizens, is they would lose their house. But honestly, Michael, if you own a house with 10% that you have put down on the table and 90% that you owe to your banker, you don't really own the house.
Right.
So what happens then? Let's say you have a massive default of households in the United States,
which we already have.
But then it would be across the board. It would be much more dramatic if we had any significant deflation. Let's say the prices would now diminish by 30% or something like this. This would hit everybody, the entire country. Now, I don't think that this is actually a reason for much concern. Bankruptcy laws are pretty liberal in the United States. So as a family, you get out of this very, very fast. So what do you do then? Well, you will rent a house. And after the deflation, there will be a lot of houses for rent, and for rent at very low prices.
Right.
So it's not that you will be without a roof.
Right.
You will simply, for a while, rent the place until finally, if you have built up your savings again, then you buy the place.
Exactly. And even in some states, and I'm not really conversant with all of them, but I know that there are some states that have what they call homestead laws that disallow you from losing your house if you go through bankruptcy. And so that is also out there. But on this particular point about it being a political problem, you mentioned that deflation is a fight. The deflation fight is a special interest fight to protect the existing establishment.
Right.
I thought that was a very, very profound statement. Now, does deflation bring us back in touch with a more real world?
Yes, to the extent that, again, inflationary finance is based on the goodwill of those who create money artificially out of nothing. So they have not provided any real service. It's just really their mere opinion or their mere friendship, their mere will that certain things be such and such. So they finance projects just because they like them, not because they have earned the support of the rest of the citizens that puts them in the position now to spend that money. And so you get out of touch with reality because anything is possible once you start financing things with a printing machine.
I have a quote from you that is also from your book. It says, "It brings the entire society back in touch with the real world because it destroys the economic basis of the social engineers, spin doctors, and brainwashers." You don't like to mince words much, do you?
No, I mean, things should be said clearly and honestly. And I think it's a fairly accurate description of the current state of affairs. Of course, in a completely free society, you would still have people of this sort, but much less.
Sure.
Right? Because right now, who is the biggest employer of these likes?
Right.
It's the government.
Right.
It's banks.
Who get the money first or
Exactly.
second.
Yes. Yeah.
Exactly. So that's a very important point. So let's talk about the cleansing effect of deflation. Now, as it pertains to this current crisis, how would deflation actually be of benefit as we're dealing with our current crisis that we're dealing with right now?
So the problem that you have in a crisis is that in the past you've invested in the wrong projects, and in our particular crisis we also have a huge debt problem. So you're in way too much debt and you cannot really move. Right? So what deflation does is, as we have seen before, it redistributes assets. That is, assets that have not been productively used by the past investors are now reshuffled to investors who will use them differently. This entails, well, sometimes bankruptcy, and some companies will actually be closed and so on. Others will be set up. And what deflation also does is to get us rid of our debt problem. Because deflation, as we have seen, entails bankruptcy, the inability to pay back. So then the assets formerly belonging to the debtor revert back now to his creditor. And the debt disappears. And once you have a big meltdown, deflationary meltdown of the economy, what the meltdown really means is not that the real economy melts down because all the physical stuff is still there. What it means is that the debt melts down. There's no more debt after this whole process.